You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Well, welcome to the Be Better Off Show, where we bring you fantastic Australians who have an amazing story that can help you be healthier, wealthier, and wiser. And today's guest, Jarrod Rawlins, is the senior curator at Mona in Tasmania. It's a real privilege to have you here with us this morning, Jarrod. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Brett. Thanks for having us. But it's good to be here.
Well, I really appreciate you joining us, and not just you, but you and your panda in multiple forms and your beautiful deer.
There's animals everywhere down here.
It's terrific. Now, I always love to start, and at Kelly+Partners, we really believe, you start with a person. It so influences sort of who they are and what they do. Can you share with us, where did you grow up? And what was your educational background, family background, and how did you come to being involved, I guess, in art and art as an industry?
Interesting tale, I guess, from my perspective, and hopefully from at least one other person's, we'll see. But I grew up in a town called Geelong outside of Melbourne, which is quite a thriving place at the moment, actually, and never really knew whether... it was unclear growing up in the suburbs. I like to say I grew up in Ramsay Street, it looked like neighbours. It was a very boring suburban kind of place with some brick veneer houses and, a peaceful kind of area in the world with not a lot happening though. And so the path to being involved in the arts, especially at the level of which I've been involved, was certainly not present there and unclear. So how it happened was really by happenstance more than anything, I guess, and just about doing things rather than actually having a plan. My parents certainly weren't involved in the arts in any way. Nobody in my family had been. And I was just always, I think since I was a kid, I was triggered by art itself. I went to art classes when I was 10 and wanted to learn to draw. I'm terrible, actually, probably one of the worst artists that's ever lived myself. But the art itself was always a draw card for me. And so a disastrous secondary school period. I don't even think from memory, I didn't finish secondary school. I think I even had a couple of goes at not finishing secondary school. It was a disaster. So like a lot of people who just determined to do things, yourself, from my understanding, I took myself back to university in my 20s, to Melbourne University, and finished, took up and completed a degree in art history, to where I went on to lecture and tutor during my PhD years. I spent 10 years at Melbourne University. Probably one of the most important and special things I've ever done was getting education in art history. And so it just sort of all happened from there.
You did your PhD, Jarrod. What was your PhD in?
I never, again, to continue my tale, I never finished the PhD. I actually got caught up in teaching. I got more excited about talking than I did about writing, and I just kept talking and never actually finished the writing. I was writing a PhD was on an Italian artist called Maurizio Cattelan, and it was an interesting tale at the time, but incomplete to this date. But I have no desire to go back and complete that part of the education.
So interesting, Jarrod. I've got a 15-year-old boy and a 13-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, and when you have kids, you look at them and you know that they seem vaguely related, but everyone's so individual and different. One of the other guests we had on last year has gone on to have this tremendous career in running a wildlife park and wildlife conservation, and he left school at 14 years and 9 months and just started doing it. Why is it, education to me is really interesting. It's got such power to open opportunities, but why is it that you think you were so disengaged with secondary school?
The privilege we have in today's world, let me call it 2021 for sake of a better title, is the information we have available to us. And I'm a voracious reader. I never stop reading. If I'm not talking, I'm reading or I'm sleeping. It's one of those three things. And self-taught in a lot of areas, like a lot of people nowadays. And from what I learn now, I think, and having kids myself and trying to understand their own problems or issues with schooling and attention, I just think I was understimulated, and that was pretty much it. I was nothing more complicated than that. I wasn't engaged, and the points at school where I was engaged, I was highly engaged, and I overperformed, and the rest I underperformed. And
Okay, and then the other thing that I've picked up with so many of our guests is this determination, as you put it, to do things, and action being such a good cure for most problems. Where does that come from in terms of your mum and dad and your brothers and sisters, or, it's something that I always say you can't put into someone. But where
maybe it's a condition of the working class, Brett. I don't know. That's my family's background, and we just, I know it sounds stupid, but if you wanted to do something, you actually just had to do it.
Yeah.
No one was going to do it for you. It wasn't going to appear in front of you. And if you didn't do anything, then nothing was ever actually going to happen, quite literally. You were just going to sit there. So I think it was a condition of my environment. If I think about evolution, I think about Darwin or whatever. This was an environmental thing where I had to do things, otherwise nothing was going to happen.
So you get into Melbourne University. It's so great to hear that that was a really formative experience. How do you get to, okay, art history is this thing I want to study, early 20s? Did somebody point you at it? Did you have a mentor, or was there, because a lot of people feel locked out of those institutions because they don't know where to go. How did you stumble into that?
I'd been involved. Involved is not quite the right word. I was in the arts. I was actually looking at auctions a lot. I was going to auctions, and I was fascinated by the art market and by painting itself. So it was leading in from my this love of painting, 20th century painting and 19th century painting, following the art market in Australia, going to auctions, studying what was, why were people at Sotheby's or why were they at Christie's, and, just watching and trying to learn what that was all about. Because business, I'm a terrible business person, really. It's a shame. I wish I was actually a bit better at it, but I'm a terrible business person, but fascinated by business and always kind of studied it. And so the art market was as much of an interest to me as the art itself. And I think there's no way of learning about the art market. Unlike other markets, you just have to actually participate in the art market. So the best way into it is through art history and understanding the minute detail of everything that you're looking at and everything that's being traded. So I knew I needed an art history degree. So Melbourne University was the best one. So that was the one I focused on and went and did.
Okay, so you get there, moderate high school results, you're at the university. Was it really something that, that was a revelation, or did you just feel like you'd sort of, I'm such a believer in momentum that, sort of slipstreams. Did you just feel like you'd sort of found your people, found your place? And
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the best way to describe it. And it was both a revelation and momentum. And once I'd started, it was just, I'm still here. I am. I haven't stopped.
So share with us, that's the beginning. And for our guests who are listening, tell us about Mona. What is the role of a senior curator? And to me, it's obviously an enormous privilege to be able to work at the scale and real, innovative scope that Mona has pursued. It's, I guess, evolution, really, revolution. Can you tell us, when did Mona start? Why does it exist? What's its purpose? How did you get involved?
Mona opened what I like to call the first building, opened in 2011, which is 10 years ago now. But as Mona is, and as David's will is, Mona is constantly growing, and it has grown since that opening and continues to grow. And it is an exercise in pushing the site that David's thinking, the architect's thinking, the artist's thinking to, as far as the limits that we can push at any one time, and we're constantly doing that. And I mean, I don't know how often you've been to Mona or if you've been there, but there are these quite significant architectural stages where we're just adding hundreds of square metres every few years, digging bigger holes and creating more ambitious permanent structures with artists, collaborating with artists. So that's one of my main roles, is working with artists on ambitious construction projects that they otherwise wouldn't actually ever undertake, because nobody else in the museum world will take the risk. And these are not just budgetary risks. I mean, all spending on infrastructure that can't produce income is a risk anyway, but actually just producing creative risks in some of these buildings is an incredible thing a privilege that we actually get to do, that a lot of museums just don't actually have the ability to take those risks. And that's primarily my role.
So why do you think that is? You know, I have a theory, but what do you think makes Mona different in that respect?
We don't have a board. So David Walsh is very much engaged and making the decisions and driving the agenda. And it's a single vision with a single person who wants to take risks and achieve certain things.
So tell us about David Walsh, founder, a little bit, I guess, for our audience, to give some context. You know, who is this person? Where does he come from? And what are the vibrations like up close and personal?
Yeah, it's fun. We have a good time. David is, working class boy from the suburbs of Hobart, who spent a lot of time locked up in libraries as a kid, reading every book from cover to cover and hiding in the corner and learning everything there is about the world, and to go on to become a talented mathematician who turned that around into a gambling business that has become quite successful, I think is the term. And out of his success, David has said a number of times he wanted to give back to the community as much as he could from his life of earning money without actually having to do a great deal. So he's doing a great deal in putting it back and spending a lot of time and energy and money on contributing. He wanted to build a museum. He had a museum before what we call Mona existed, but it was a small, boring museum that looked like a museum, a small one that you would find, the interest to a few specialists in the world. And this thing is grown into something that fascinates and interests people without them even realising. They come and leave bewildered and excited, and they come back. And so he created something quite special that allows as a kind of, I guess it's a silly word that gives permission, but encourages everybody to want to come and think about art and experience what art can mean to a human. So it allows you to come and hate the art quite comfortably, or love it. And that's one of Mona's main things, as one of David's goals. And what is David and your, and I guess Mona's conception of what art is and what role it can play and why it's important? One of the interesting things that shifted for me from my previous career as a gallerist to then moving to work for David and come down to Tasmania was shifting my thinking, which is what Mona does. I spent 20 years thinking about what art is, to then shifting into thinking about why art exists. And at Mona, we don't really try and think about or define art. we're happy to accept that art comes in many different forms. And our main goal is to think about why humans make art. And so it really is coming from an evolutionary biological perspective, a Darwinian perspective on, the way I like to think about it in simple terms, which is easier for us art people when it comes to thinking about science, is why do human beings wake up in the morning and go and make art? Because it's not a particularly obvious thing. It's really obvious to me as to why someone might get up in the morning and go and cook food for other people, or why you might help somebody, improve their wealth or their own personal holdings, or why we might go and do sport, why we might be competitive in that sense. But it's not clear why we wake up in the morning and go and make paintings. It's really unclear. And so one of Mona's goals is to explore and hopefully come up with some answers as to why humans actually perform this behaviour.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And, the perspective I've always had is that I think people are inherently creative, and that so much more of what we all do is creativity than is often acknowledged. I think with the arts generally, it's sort of like, well, the artists are over there, and then the builders are over there, and the entrepreneurs are over there, and the scientists are over there. When you think from that evolutionary perspective, people are creating, being recreated, and people are, I think, inherently far more creative than is often acknowledged. And then that desire to judge what is art, I think, misses that evolutionary piece, which is, more interesting, and that is that, people are creative and it manifests in many different ways. So I think it's so interesting. We do a lot of work with people in the arts generally, and the very best artists that I've come to know, acknowledge how creative people are generally. The best surgeons that have worked out. My daughter had, a heart condition, and when you see these heart surgeons working on hearts that are, this big, the surgeons themselves who worked out how to treat these conditions, the level of sort of creative thinking is just far beyond science. It's really very, very interesting. So that's why I think Mona has such a role to play. And you mentioned there this concept of giving people permission to hate art or hate, someone's art. I think that's, it's so important, because no response is failure, as opposed
Absolutely.
to, I never mind if you meet someone and they hate you or they like you, but for them to be indifferent really is the greatest failure in my view. And so that's why I think it's so interesting, this approach. There's a lot of research that looks at companies that have been that are run by founders and the difference that makes. What you shared there, Jarrod, about you've got a founder, he's got a vision, there isn't a board, so to speak of. For you as sort of the senior curator there, how different is it to, I take it the politics is easy because you got one boss, the vision's clear and it doesn't flip-flop and change every day. Do you feel, to me, that's a very empowered position to be in. Is that the reality of it for you as a, really professional in this space?
I mean, in a nutshell, yes. I mean, of course, I'd love to think that my workplace was free of politics like everyone would, but, of course, there's always something going on in the background. But when it comes to the high-level deliverables and what we're actually trying to achieve, having that direction from that is clear and decisive is very empowering, and it allows you then kind of, I guess, ironic way to become more creative, because you're off problem solving with the first part of the problem actually having already been dealt with. This is what we're going to do, and this is how I think we'd like to do it. And so these are decisions that boards and large groups can get bogged down into and become indecisive and in fact flail and end up with things that I can think of that don't excite me.
Just sort of mediocre, just sort of in the middle.
Mediocre is the perfect word. Yeah, exactly. And we talk about the middle actually quite a lot at work, that being aware and being careful of drifting towards the middle is a term that I think would come up at least weekly in some kind of meeting, but being careful that we don't drift towards the middle, that we are, we're not deliberately trying to be antagonistic, or, there's no real agenda there in being self-aggrandizing as being radical or anything like that. But being aware of not drifting towards the middle is important to make sure that what we are doing is always slightly breaking expectations that people might have, which is what leads you to be able to come to Mona and hate the art. So what we do is the way museums were set up a few hundred years ago, and especially in the 20th century, as houses of expertise, and they anoint particular activities with, literally, I'll get my sword out and I'll anoint you as you're doing the right thing and you're the right artist and you're great. We don't do that. We don't make those claims. We invite you, and we don't stick a little thing next to the painting or the video saying this person is very important and this is why you're looking at it. We use technology, for example, to deliver our opinions on the artwork via the phones, and we have a whole range of it that allows us to have a whole range of opinions, to ask questions, and we don't make claims. We don't tell you what to think. That's the most important thing, and that allows you to come in and go, well, I think this is shit, and that freedom, I think, is part of Mona's success and what gets people. I mean, we like to think that a lot of people coming to the museum are actually going to experience art and contemporary art, which we have a lot of contemporary art, for the first time. And they're entering this, let's face it, the contemporary art world is a strange place full of strange people doing weird things, right? And so what we do is we allow people who are not part of that world, don't want to be, don't need to be, to come in and observe it and leave with their own feelings and thoughts. Yeah, and I think it's that vision, that's the single vision, really. I mean, the other visions are architectural and the way we really want to create further experiences, for you physically, that's part of it. But David's vision of the anti-museum really is the thing that allows me to be creative. Yeah,
it's very cool. Like, I think, for an organisation that's 10 years old to have established itself so well, I think you put it so well there, in that, the world seldom needs another Me Too business or Me Too gallery. Some of the great galleries in the world are just, unduplicatable in their awesomeness at being themselves. It would be impossible, I think, to you see the Louvre, I think Abu Dhabi trying to really recreate the Louvre, if you like. And to me, and I'm just an outsider looking in saying, well, I'm not sure that's the strategy I'd go with, because there already is a Louvre and you're always going to be second to the Louvre. And the Louvre itself was an act of creation that came out of a time and place for a specific reason. And so, this idea of, Tasmania it does have its own character, its own uniqueness in terms of how it fits into Australia. So in terms of the place of this gallery, I think that's really interesting. David himself, in terms of his background and a sort of outsider's perspective, I think is really interesting. And then sort of manifesting an anti-gallery, if you like, something that has something new and different to say, has certainly resonated. So why don't we talk, for the business people, our audience is largely people that own private businesses, but let's talk the business of this enterprise. Obviously, it wasn't founded with the conception of a return on equity, if you like, traditional financial metrics, but your audience is significant and would be the envy of many mediocre arts institutions around the world. What are the numbers these days, Jarrod, and what do you put that down to at a commercial level?
The numbers are good. The numbers have grown. The graph has consistently grown since opening 10 years ago. I think we just pre-COVID, we were just heading in over the 100,000 visitors a year mark. So that's a few million people through in a decade. And look, from memory, we just reopened a museum after closing for 8 months. And the numbers actually have been really amazingly great, considering the travel restrictions, of course. So, there's so many things we could put it down to. I think there's ultimately a fascinating story behind the museum, which is David Walsh. And, the art is key and important. The architecture is also key and important. But I think it's this story of this guy that's slightly mysterious and fascinating and, he's like a famous nerd. And I think that gets people to get on the plane. And also combined with that story of the founder, the idea that there is something that is actually, I use the term world class, which makes me uncomfortable because I'm not particularly provincial, but that's the way journalists like to describe it. So I'll use it. On this island in the middle of nowhere at the bottom of the world, and I think that fascinates people as well. And I used to come to Tasmania before Mona, and so I have my own reasons for coming here that a lot of people don't share. But this amazing museum is actually something that is quite easy to want to come to see. It's not, you don't have to put on a backpack or trudge through mud for a few days to experience this thing in Tasmania. You can get a ferry and a bottle of champagne and then go and have a 3-course lunch. It's quite an incredibly pleasant and amazing place to come and visit. And those people who have been also know, and I think this is the success and this is how the marketing works, is that once you have been, you can't actually describe how fun it is and what's actually happening here on this site. And so that traditional word of mouth of people saying you've got to go and see it actually is the success.
I think it taps into, Jarrod, like I think the Australian psyche generally, likes a rebel, likes an outsider, doesn't like pretension, I think is quite modernist in its outlook and is quite open to change and new experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that lack of pretension that I think is what attracts people. Attracts people, what I mean is makes people comfortable and makes them want to come. And I guess the Australianness of it, there's a bar every 100 metres, I always say at Mona. There's somewhere to eat every 150 metres. And it's about coming and relaxing and not having this heightened experience where you feel you have to behave in a particular way. You don't walk into the Met in New York and grab a tinny on your way past the reception before you go and have a look at the Damien Hirsts. Whereas at Mona,
which is interesting, right? Because like Damien Hirst is a real fuck you artist.
Mm.
And so often these very modern artists are being put in institutions where the tone of the staff is very elitist. I think makes many people feel very uncomfortable when you take, your kids there. I've got one child who really loves his art, but he's we call him an oddball. He's a really wonderful kid, but it's sort of like, don't step there, don't touch there, don't cough, don't be loud, don't do this. So it's almost like a don't institution. And we love galleries, and we've been to, we go to any city, we go to every gallery, and we always have. But in trying to take a kid who loves his art into, and is very much, an arty kid, they're almost, well, they certainly feel like anti-arty places. They feel much more comfortable to attend in your best suit and tie, and that just has never made any sense to me.
No, and exactly, and that's something that we're again acutely aware of, but we don't have a written script on how we feel we need to negotiate that. We're just doing it naturally.
So how do you recruit? You're recruiting for your people. All of our clients, I always say that, 100% of your opportunities in your business is the quality of your people. Knowing your values and the experience you're trying to give your client is so critical. But in the art world, it's a small pool of people you're drawing from. I think Tasmania probably helps. But how do you have people that are approachable, that are not elitist, that are not snobs, that really want people to experience the art that you're presenting with the ethos that you're trying to roll out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not involved in any way in any recruitment, so I don't know the literal answer to that question, but I'm involved in setting the tone of the museum, which goes a long way to the way the recruiting unfolds. So I think by setting the tone, which is let's continue with this anti-museum narrative, and making sure that anti-museum doesn't drift towards the middle and try and become pretentious and, become self-important and like all of the other institutions, which the other institutions are important, don't get me wrong, but I think variety is more important. So that's the role we want to play. I don't think the world needs to continue to build more elitist institutions. We've got them, they're there, they've got the things, great, but let's do some other things now. So I think being able to be part of setting that tone attracts, let me say, the right people, I guess, that want to be part of that. And the enthusiasm and the pride that I find in the staff we've got 400 plus staff on every level, is fantastic, and the staff wear Mona like a badge of pride. They really do, and they own it. They love it. They love talking about it, and they want to tell you. Ironically, they want to tell you why you should be there, but you're already there when they're telling you. So they want to share their enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I think what you've hit on there is so true. It's got to come. Setting the tone has to come from the leadership, and from the top, really. And
David ultimately actually would like to see the museum be cost neutral, to be able to produce enough of its own income to be self-sustaining. That's actually a goal in his head, to see if that's possible, because no one's tried this with museums before. Everybody just says, it's all a lost leader. We're going to have to prop it up. It's art, can't possibly support itself. It's a welfare kind of situation. And that might not necessarily actually be true. And I think David would like to see whether there's a way of creating a model that includes the art and also a business case that financially supports all of that activity together. And to do that, you have to have all of the staff be part of the story. They don't have to believe the story. They have to be part of the story. And then that buy-in will go a long way to create the success. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do.
Interesting. That's so interesting, because the arts generally can have this entitlement mentality because of the lack of a profit motive, in my view. Because unlike everyone else in the economy, there tends to be a lot of people involved in the industry that think that somehow the public purse owes it a living, which I've always found odd as a conception. Notwithstanding acknowledging the contribution that the arts makes, but so does the local heart surgeon, right? He makes a fair sized contribution as well, and isn't expecting a bonus from all of us or whatever. I think that this idea that you could build something that people want to support, that they want to see have a long-term viable and sustainable future, I think is interesting. And, the way I've thought about profitability in a business is really to think about sustainability as a concept. People these days better understand that, and without a viable financial position, then something isn't sustainable. So in terms of the 50-year or the 100-year vision for the organization, where does David and yourself, where do you see this really incredible organization evolving to over that time? What's the vision?
I don't think we operate in a way that I can actually probably answer that question. We're not, there's always something happening a few years in the future, just by the nature of how long it takes us to actually do something. But the details, or what I call the dot points on an answer to that are not particularly clear, and I don't think they're particularly clear to David. They ebb and flow depending on what's happening. Obviously, this COVID has thrown a few plans up in the air. The idea of trying to build a business case, a model around, and quite literally around this, here's the museum, and build all this activity around the museum that actually produces income enough to support the other activity. I do think that's actually probably a good goal.
And staying at the edge and keep building out that reputation for being revolutionary.
Well, yeah, and not resting, outside of that kind of business model, also not resting on our laurels that we are revolutionary, and making sure that every now and then we actually are. That's an important part of the future. So.
Really great to spend some time today, Jarrod, with you. I've really enjoyed meeting you in our chat. I guess I'd love to finish you by asking, how old are you now?
47.
So when you look back now and, you're talking to the 17-year-old you, or the, 17-year-old young kid, a lot of the people listening have got kids, and I have no doubt that all of us know that getting our kids up and running to find their slipstream is probably the hardest thing I can think of in life as a personal or professional challenge. But what do you say to this? What do you say to the 17-year-old kid and your parents? Given their backgrounds, and they were probably looking at you at school thinking, what is he doing? And then as a young man going, where is he and where's he going? What's your message for the younger you and the parent of the younger you? Look
around, basically. If you're not looking around at every detail of what's happening around you, you're going to miss the important bits. And when I was 17, there's every chance I was probably standing on a skateboard ramp next to Tony Hawk, thinking about frontside grinds. Small detail, but the big detail is looking around and going, okay, well, this Tony Hawk guy is doing his thing, and that's turning out quite well for him. How and why is that happening? Sure, and a lot of it's got to do with luck, admittedly, but by looking around at the people around you and making every person an example and a mentor, you're going to pick up a few clues for yourself. And then be tenacious. That's it, pretty much. Do not ever stop. And I think tenacity and observance, for me, are the two most important things. It's a great place to end. And, I think a tremendous message for all of us. Jarrod, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed meeting you. I want to commend Mona to any one of our listeners. Now, we've all been locked down doing this COVID thing, doing the COVID rap in 2020. And, with any luck,
we'll be able to move around Australia at least. And so to anyone out there that was thinking, where can I go? What can I do? Go to Tasmania, go to the front desk, ask for Jarrod. He has told me that he'd love to give you the personal tour. And it's what he normally does for any Kelly+Partners client that turns up. But no, in all seriousness, really tremendous opportunity for Australians to stay local and go and see something that I think is frankly mind-blowing. Congratulations, Jarrod. Really enjoyed our time together today. And thank you so much for making the time.
No, thanks, Brett. It was my pleasure. It was fun.
And as I like to say, have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.